So yeah, so when I talked about Angela Mao and the Dragon, that gives me a nice sort of transition point actually, because I want to bring Meredith into the conversation now, because I know she hasn't been able to add too much yet. But you know, we talked about Shaw as well. So as I said, Meredith, author and Shawbillis historian. So I wanted to bring her in and ask her as a female, because Meredith is in Australia as well, and grew up in Australia, born in Australia. And I guess for us, that people in the UK and in America, that's kind of a really random place for a white woman to get into kung fu films and martial arts films. So, so I really wanted to bring you in to sort of talk about this connection, because I read your book, so I know that you don't like Bruce Lee films, right? Which is going to be like a big, impactful starting point for everybody, right? And it's a very good reason for not liking them, and I fully appreciate that. So do you want to kind of delve into that for us, please?
Weng, I was hoping you wouldn't mention that. I actually sneak through Kung Fu movie fan bases without mentioning that. I don't hate him, and I understand other people's appreciation of him. And actually, in all seriousness, can I thank Marlon and Josh for sharing their stories, because that was fascinating. And I really understand how important Bruce was to the genre. It's interesting, and it's thanks for your question, Weng. And it is, I guess it is random. How does a white woman sitting on a couch in Melbourne get into martial arts films, and in a very different way to you other guys? I saw a comment in chat made by Cash, and he mentioned that he came to martial arts films a bit later in the 1990s, and he put it really well. He said he missed out on years of communal film watching, because Marlon's stories just sounded great. But I'm the same. Kung Fu movies exploded into my narrow little world when I was quite well advanced into adulthood. And they exploded via a TV channel called SBS that we have down here in Australia. It's a national channel. And what it does, it's fantastic. It's a multicultural channel. It shows programs from all over the world. So you have this great mix of news from all over the world, alongside Turkish soap operas, Swedish thrillers and cop shows, Russian quiz shows, Japanese sport, movies from everywhere. And SBS does show its fair share of martial arts movies, bless them. And I remember sometime I was in my late 20s, which is going back quite a long way. I'm a bit like you, Marlon. I'm a lot older than I look. I'm in my early 50s. So about 25 years ago, I saw in rapid succession on SBS, I remember it was Jackie Chan's Project A, followed by Warriors from Zoo Mountain. And then if those two films softened me up, I really enjoyed them. The film that flipped me over the edge and made me a lifelong fan of martial arts films and Jet Li was Once Upon a Time in China. And after that, there was no looking back. I was fascinated. So I think Josh said he was an enthusiast. And when you flatter me, when you call me a historian, I think of myself as an enthusiast as well, somebody who stumbled onto these amazing films and has never been able to give them up. So I just sort of started blogging about the films, started trying to find them and watch them more. And in terms of what we're talking about tonight, in terms of cultural impact and impact on me, something really important happened for me online, because I didn't know, I couldn't connect with other people offline who are into the films. I don't know that many people in Melbourne who like these films. I feel very lonely often. So online, I was on Facebook, I was blogging. I was incredibly shy about blogging at the time and putting my work out there. I was very shy and very worried about being criticised or trolled. And some people drew me into a Facebook page, and I got to be a moderator on a Facebook page called Heroic Sisterhood. And it was set up by this woman called Sylvia Roram, who went by the name of Achilles Girl on Facebook and later Twitter. I don't know if anybody here knows her, but she's an awesome writer with an encyclopedic knowledge of these films. And she had set up a page that was open to fans who were both male and female, but it was run and moderated by women. So there was a little of about 5 of us. And she said, get involved in this page, put your blogs on it, and get involved. And I did, and it was absolutely fantastic. But I learned 2 things about women fans of Kung Fu movies. And the first one is that we're incredibly diverse. We're scattered all over the globe. We're all ages, you know, all kinds of cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So I'm talking very much for myself when I talk about women's experience of watching Kung Fu movies, because Kung Fu movies or martial arts movies resonate for me in a different way than they would for somebody in the US or somebody in Seoul in Korea or somebody in Italy or, you know, somebody in the Middle East. But it's great because it's a very, very diverse fan base. The other thing I learned, though, getting back to this theme of communal film watching, was how important it was for me, and I think for anybody, to have a space, whether it's online or offline, to enjoy these films with a little community of people. So being surrounded by friendly people, interesting people with interesting views about these films gave me a huge amount of confidence, and I found that really empowering. So that was a really important part of me getting into these films and my personal journey towards writing this book and blogging and tweeting about them and continuing to be that enthusiast. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's thanks for sharing. That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of. It's interesting because you talk about the global community of women coming together. Because, you know, we don't generally, I guess, all the lads here, all the lads in the chat would know that you don't see that many women at sort of the screenings or generally, right? Whereas, you know, so what you all did is connected together using Facebook because you kind of scattered all over the place, right?
Yeah, I'm not as, I haven't been involved in that page for a few years. I kind of went off Facebook a bit, but it was a great experience. And you're right, Weng, we're very scattered, you know, so, but I'm always really happy when I stumble across another female fan, that's for sure. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Because also I think the one thing that's forgotten about when people talk about Kung Fu films and martial arts films as well is the number of women who were leads in these films.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, excuse me.
Yeah, when I...
Yeah, go on.
When I was doing research for my book, for example, and I'm not an expert in this, but I did find out, and I'm sure people here tonight will know that leading up to, say, the 60s, women were quite often the lead in martial arts films. And there was this huge tradition of these really, you know, really expert swordswomen rescuing their male love interests. And then you had the intervention of Chang Che and Bruce Lee, and they swung the dial back towards films with more male stories. But I think all the way through martial arts, right up to today, that there have always been really great female characters and really great female performers of those characters as well. I mean, you mentioned Angela Mao, for example. That's just one example. Yeah.
Yeah, so many. Angela Mao, Cheng Pei, you know, Cara Wai.
Yeah.
Andrew, I'm sure you've seen many of their films before.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, that's the thing is that, I mean, it was Chang Che used to call it the Yang Gang, but this idea of the very masculine, and you know, when you started to use Weng Yu and people like that, and yeah, as you say, Meredith, absolutely pushed it to much more of a Western idea, I think, of the hero being male, you know, and what was being seen in, you know, Bond films and action films from the West.
Yeah. It's really interesting to consider, and it's something I tread very carefully around. I don't want to sound like I'm critical of Chang Che because I love his films. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. But I am fascinated, and I would love to find out more about that earlier era with those empowered women. But like I said, there are plenty of great female characters and performers. I really enjoy Michelle Yeoh's films, and again, another film I was lucky to see, I think, in my career of watching these films was Yes, Madam, with Cynthia Rothrock and Michelle Yeoh, and that,
I love that
just
film.
knocked me
it's
out.
One of my favorite
Loved
films
it.
ever. Yeah.
So dynamic to see those women who are so strong and such interesting characters and so dynamic was really, really something. I think.
Yeah, and Cynthia Roth actually is an interesting story because she was the first white lead in Hong Kong films, I think.
Yeah.
So Hong Kong action films. The first white female to ever lead those films, which is very unusual at the time because there hadn't been any male leads. The first white lead was a woman who did martial arts, which is a very interesting path to go down in film sort of history. Yeah, and it was something that, you know, she was very successful in Hong Kong too. She made quite a few films before she went back to America. And then when she went back to America, she carried on making films as well. And I think one of the problems that she encountered going back to America is that she had to make films for the white gaze rather than for the, through the Hong Kong gaze as well. So a lot of the times there's like, if you watch like China O'Brien, they talk about her sexuality a lot. Whereas in the Hong Kong films, that's not mentioned anywhere in a lot of her roles. You know, it's literally, she just goes there, kicks ass and it's done.
You know what? Yeah, you know what, Weng, that's a really interesting point you just brought up. And it's something I've often thought to myself as I watch martial arts movies with female characters in the lead, what I love about them, and I might be wrong, but I really think this is true. In Western films with female action characters, there's often some kind of backstory or some kind of condition or context that's spelled out to us, that explains to us why that woman is so tough and why she can kick ass. And that's fine. It's usually an interesting story. Whereas in Kung Fu movies, you don't get that. They're just a martial artists because they're martial artists, you know?
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That's one I hadn't considered as well. Because I was just kind of thinking of those, like, one of my favorite films is Wing Chun by Michelle Yeoh. Michelle Yeoh, sorry. As Yin Wing Chun, and she's just a martial artist from the beginning. So there's no tragic backstory or anything like that. And I think also with the Kung Fu films, they don't sexualize the characters as much. You know, Western films, they always sexualize the women, even the women female heroes. Like we talk about sort of Ripley and others as well. It's not loads, but you know, sort of the 80s badass female in Western films. There's always there's always a sexual undertone to it, or there's always something that can happen to them. Like I talked about with Angela Mao sort of being threatened sexually in Enter the Dragon. That just doesn't happen, and well, it's very rare in like Kung Fu films.
I think that's a really great point. And when you said that about Angela Mao in Enter the Dragon, I thought, yeah, he's right, and I hadn't picked up on that. I had been thinking today about Angela Mao in Hapkido, which is a great film, and how much I love how she's great in that film. You know, such a great screen fighter, really good performance. But I love in that film how, again, she's not sexualized. She's feminine, but not sexualized. But she's this comrade with her male comrades, and they're in that together. She offers a lot of moral leadership as well. And I just like it in these films. Another one, I love Michelle Yeoh, as I said, and Tai Chi Master in that film. I love the friendship her character has with Jet Li's character. And they don't get off. There's no big romance, but they support each other. And I love the way these women can be depicted as comrades in arms and with this kind of friendship with these men. And I find that very empowering to watch, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I've been reminded by Sue, our director, that that half of our team are women as well. So, so there's plenty of women. So I do know plenty of women who are influenced. But I was, talking about the fan base being mostly male. But I do know plenty of women who could drop a few hits to my face as comrades as well. So I shouldn't forget about them. But yeah, I think it's one of those areas, because we've talked about sort of the black connection and women as well. And these are very prominent issues at the moment when we're looking at the world generally today, sort of Black Lives Matter, social justice, feminism, things like that as well. I guess it's kind of almost like a shame that more women haven't seen Kung Fu films and sort of related to them, I guess, because, and it's weird because me growing up as an Asian too, like in Asia, it's just really normal for women to go out there and kick some Kung Fu films. And so, I grew up with these strong female role models already, so I was, in a way, like I was already respecting women. And I guess it's such a different viewpoint from me. I was always respecting, respecting women and seeing these strong women in films and stuff. It's so different from the perspective coming from the West, I think.
Do you know, I feel I've seen that with male fans of the films when we talk about martial arts films with these female characters or female performers, that the guys, I think quite unconsciously reveal an attitude of, yeah, they love the films, yeah, they think they're fun, yeah, they might think Michelle Yeoh's hot or whatever, and that's okay, but there's this attitude of respect as well that I do feel I pick up on. That like we had a lot of male followers on the Heroic Sisterhood Facebook page, and I remember they used to post their fan art or their YouTube tribute clips that they'd make, and maybe make about female performers, and they really showcased the female performers, and I thought that was really, really great. Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that actually as well. You know, sort of the male fans of the genre too. I mean, we've got 3 male fans of the genre right here. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, that I mean, that is really good to hear. I've not really engaged much with, for want of a better word, the fandom online around kung fu films, martial art films. But that's good to hear that there's that kind of positive appreciation and mutual appreciation and encouragement to other fans. That, like, it's very common to find kind of a typecast for a fandom where people are quite insular. They don't like others kind of coming into the fandom, and so that's really good to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I might be just lucky. There are trolls out there, I know there are, but maybe I have seen some positive interactions as well. So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's a perspective I hadn't considered at all. So that's really interesting. All right, cool. So last but not least, we haven't talked to Andrew that much yet about, and I know Andrew always has plenty to say, having known Andrew for a couple of years now. So we talked about sort of the black, the black community and women as well. And for yourself, I guess it's, we're looking at the white male now. So for want of a better word.
I mean, I think I think when I really got to properly engage with and actually kind of properly get into to kung fu movies and to Hong Kong action movies, my story is pretty typical. So in the early 80s, my parents got a video player, Betamax, and I started, so I had a bit of access to kung fu movies. I tell you what, I mean, the thing for me that I couldn't really get into it was the pan and scan and the dubbing of those films, particularly watching on tape. It just did not do them any favors. And I know technically that all the Hong Kong films were dubbed anyway, we know that, but it just made a complete disconnect. And I think it really wasn't until kind of going back to when I was growing up, there was sort of the Western version of the Kung Fu David Carradine series that I saw. But it wasn't until Channel 4 did their Chinese Ghost Stories season, and they started playing lots of Hong Kong movies in widescreen, in the original language with subtitles, and Mr. Vampire, and we're starting to see with the Jackie Chan Project A and Police Story, and like absolutely being blown away. It was like the other part of that was the Jonathan Ross series as well, the Incredibly Strange film show. Which exposed a lot of, I think, just because I didn't have that Photoshop. I wasn't old enough, I wasn't in London to be able to be any cinemas where they would be showing that stuff. And I think if there were, I would have been drawn towards it, definitely. It was kind of inevitable, it was going to draw me in at some point. But it was definitely seeing that stuff on Channel 4, staying up late on a Friday night to watch it, and and video it on my, by that time, VHS. And just really started absolutely loving it, and just realizing there was for me, it was always that point where I realized, like, okay, there's a place in the world where they make every kind of movie that I want to see, and it's Hong Kong.
Is it? Because I was thinking, what drew you to the films in the first place?
I remember, for those of us a certain age, might remember Walter Margin and the Monkey TV series, which are a Japanese take, very, in hindsight, very influenced by Shaw Brothers Productions, made about classic Chinese stories, and very casually dubbed into English, because quite it was a well-known fact that the guy that did it didn't read the original scripts. He had like a précis of what the episodes were about and just went off and they made up dialogue. And there were people like Andrew Sachs and Marjim McGoals who were some of the voices on that. So quite well known, or people who would be quite well known actors. Very, you know, apart from the fact that Burt Kwok was one of the voices for Walter Margin, they were in fact really quite racist in how they stereotype things in a take on it.
Andrew, can I just jump in there and say I watched that series too as a little kid and I loved it. And I bought it just recently and it's been my lockdown viewing. With my head's been scrambled, lockdown tension. And I agree, the dubbing's as racist as it can get. It's dreadful. But I still love the series. It's so much fun.
It's a real shame that I think the only place on because they restored all the episodes, and a few years back they released, for Walter Margin, they released them on Blu-ray, but only the German version has the original language, which I'd love to have seen. But it was this kind of weird, it's such a weird mashup, Japanese, Shaw Brothers influence, Chinese, very classic Chinese, full classic Chinese, full classic Chinese.
Yeah, I remember Monkey Magic as well, just about remember Monkey Magic. One of my favourite series.
Again, I've got the soundtrack up there. So.
It's an extensive collection.
Yeah, just say we also grew up on those programs as well. So Walter Margin, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it now to see all those racist sort of stuff. But I don't know, at the time, I don't think it dawned on us, or it really. I think it was the norm in those days, because I mean, God, we had loads of those programs, British programs on TV, where calling us all kinds of names, black this and black that, and that was normal in comedy, you know, Love Thy Neighbour and all that kind of stuff. And Walter Margin, I had to sit there watching it. I loved the Walter Margin, as well as watching originally Monkey, when Monkey first came on TV, and then obviously Kung Fu. We used to watch, Kung Fu with David Carradine as well. So we used to watch all those programs, anything to do with martial arts. Used to watch them basically, and used to love watching it basically. And but I'm sure if I was to look back now and go back and re-watch them, I probably would cringe a bit and would say, "Oh my God, bloody hell, what's going on there?" You know what I mean? But we used to sit and watch them, and we were totally engrossed.
Yeah, it happens a lot. I think you go back and you think, "Oh wow, that was super racist." When you go back and watch some 80s films and stuff that you just didn't.
I guess the other big thing in terms of exposure to this kind of the martial arts and what was becoming the waifu would be Big Trouble in Little China as well. Again, that was something that to get hold of. Then,
although with Big Trouble in Little China, I will say this, that John Carpenter did consult all the Chinese people in the film to make sure it wasn't racist, or to like as least racist as possible. And I always think of that film as a really interesting example of a film, because it's made in the West. Kurt Russell is the lead, but he's not the hero in the film.
No.
And he, at no point is he the hero in the film until the end when he gets a lucky hit. But the entire time he's getting like
he's the joke.
He's
the joke.
He's the joke of the film.
He's the sidekick. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the sidekick.
I mean, that's really
in the film.
What makes actually, and I watched it again recently. It does actually deflect. And you've got, a great the sort of American Asian community in there as well. You've got lots of really great actors in that.
Yeah, and Carter Wong's in it as well, who was also another sort of legendary actor as well from Asia too.
It came from a lot of actual love for those films, and you can see it. It's a
it's one, honestly, it's one of my favorite films of all time, because Kurt Russell isn't the hero.
Yeah,
his friend Wing is the hero. So that's like that was the thing. That was the thing that really made me love the film from the start, and I still love it. I watched it again recently because my girlfriend hadn't seen it, and she thought it was really good as well. Because she grew up in Asia, so she'd never seen it.
I also love that film growing up.
It's amazing, isn't it? And
I just wanted to, could I just jump in and because I'm loving all this talk about the VHS and kind of TV syndication stuff, because I think it's worth, what I was talking about was kind of a lot of the initial releases in the 70s, but it's worth thinking about all of this in kind of generational terms. And I mean, certainly for my generation, I wasn't going to the cinema in the 70s. And for me, it was a lot of the VHS tapes that people had taped off the TV, or bootlegs potentially that they picked up somewhere, and they were just lying around. And this was kind of you know, there's a whole generation of whose parents had got into it when they were in the cinemas, and this had kind of filtered down to them. And as you say, on TV, you know, that was also an access point. And then also when this influence started to kind of meet out in popular culture, where films, this kind of merging was manifesting in a lot of the films that were getting commissioned, like you said, Big Trouble in Little China, fantastic film, and The Last Dragon as well.
Yeah.
And then that was, you know, for a whole new generation of fans, that was their access point.
Yeah, and also I forgot to drop this in earlier actually, because I was reading up about the Black Karate Federation recently. So Black Karate Federation was formed in the early 70s because Black karate masters were basically being discriminated against in competitions. So this was formed in America actually, so what they did is because they were being discriminated against, so they felt that a black man would never be allowed to win a karate competition. So they formed like a martial arts association. So they called it the Black Karate Federation, but they also introduced they also allowed in lots of martial arts from other disciplines as well. And I think it's another example of how these films, you know, there were so many people getting into martial arts at the time. Because one of the things we didn't mention, or that I found out as well, is that when martial arts films came in, it actually gave legitimacy to a lot of martial arts schools. Because previously they, you know, it's kind of a myth that Bruce Lee got in trouble because he taught foreigners, because actually it wasn't that he taught foreigners, because he was so young and calling himself a master, because he was only, late 20s at the time. And that was actually one of the major issues. It wasn't that, because other people were already teaching foreign at the time, but kind of on the down low and not very obviously. So actually a lot of the friction was because he was like this young upstart kind of arrogant guy who was teaching people, and he shouldn't have been teaching, was the kind of thing. But people have been learning martial arts for a while, but it never had legitimacy. You know, because we talk about karate had legitimacy because of James Bond. You know, James Bond used karate, so everyone's like, oh, karate is legit. You know, whereas in martial arts, everyone's like, oh, martial arts, whatever, blah blah blah. Until sort of Bruce, and then, you know, much as I dislike the David Carradine Kung Fu for other personal reasons, you know, it was something that was on primetime TV, really kind of softened down, but then still made Kung Fu access, you know, brought it to a wider audience. Whether we like it or not, you know, Bruce should have had that role and so forth. It's still very much leaked into the mainstream from there as well, and gave legitimacy to a lot of schools. So people started learning martial arts in droves. You know, some good, some bad. We're not going to say everybody's good, but, you know, even terrible schools were starting to get credibility because they were teaching martial arts as well. You know, and that's another thing that hasn't been looked at too much either in terms of people learning martial arts.
Just to jump in quickly, I think what you said about Bruce Lee, and whether it's a myth or not, about him kind of being reprimanded and, you know, the masters coming over to challenge him or whatever. I think him being open about it and being kind of trying to spread this philosophy of kind of openness around access to martial arts, I think is key. I'm glad you mentioned that. And also I think we'd be remiss without, from the framing of this discussion, not to mention Jesse Raymond Glover, who was I don't know if he was his first student, but he was certainly an early student of Bruce Lee's, and he was black, and also kind of then went on to teach after he was a student. So I think it's worth mentioning him too.
Yeah, well, he was teaching black men as well, wasn't he? He didn't care who he taught to, he just taught everybody, right? You know, because Bruce encountered a lot of racism himself going to university in America, so he was like, it's all good, guys, come, I'll teach you all the same. And just as a kind of addendum to that, you know, they big up the fight with him and Wong Jack-man in the films and stuff, but he actually became friends with Wong Jack-man afterwards. So, you know, they ended up being friends and respected each other greatly as teachers. Anyway, so we digressed quite heavily there. So sort of coming back to Andrew quickly, you know, we talked about, I guess we didn't really, so, like I said, you talked about those early series, and what else kind of brought you into those films as well? You know, because our themes here are oppression and, you know, looking for our heroes who reflect us, whereas for you it's very different, I think. Not very different, but it's different.
I think it was the mix of, because I love Kung Fu movies. I actually just really loved all the sorts of movies. So I like the crime, heroic bloodshed, kind of action movies, you know, Rude. All these films were coming out and felt very sophisticated. They looked amazing. They had amazing action sequences. And I think, you know, I'm just, you know, growing up, I like film generally, and it just seemed to be, I don't know. It just seemed to do everything that I wanted to do in a film, and from there, that love grew to eventually to Eastern Kicks, and now we've been going. I didn't actually flag it up, but it's 18 years now.
Wow.
Online. But I just couldn't stop being enthusiastic about it. I couldn't stop being enthusiastic about the films that I was seeing, where it's Jackie, in those days of Jackie Chan, not so much nowadays, but the, Infernal Affairs and all these films that are coming out that just one way or another just kind of, tick that box. When all the old Celestial Pictures got hold of all the old Shaw Brothers films and started putting that out, so you could see Come Drink With Me and glorious kind of, Technicolor, widescreen, so beautiful, such a great story, so amazingly acted, and just all the, King Hu was all about the kind of technical camera tricks and all that kind of stuff, very practical kind of, using trampolines and all that kind of stuff, to Yan Wo-ping's very kind of close style of shooting some of that action to again kind of using very kind of like nice set pieces. I just ended up becoming incredibly enthusiastic, and the reason I set up Eastern Kicks was to try and stop myself from boring people, and when Crouching Tiger, in the pub, I was like, okay, well, let's put this somewhere else. But by the time Crouching Tiger was out, I was like, hey, okay, yeah, but you want to see these other films, you want to see The Sword, you want to see Chuck Shiv's Then, you want to see, all these, so it was about my enthusiasm for them, and I don't know, maybe somewhere spiritually there's something that kind of that got to me. I mean, I love Hong Kong, but I just think it's, in some ways, it is very easy to underrate these films. I kind of took over a critical kind of point of view. It's they're kind of seen action films, or very simplistic, but that's not at all fair in any way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, Meredith, you wrote about that in your book as well, didn't you? About the sort of chop socky view of martial arts films.
Yes, yeah. I must admit, I was a little bit divided as to whether I should use the word chop socky or not, because it's quite derogatory, and I get a bit defensive about the film. But I used to, a billion years ago, when I was young and thin and fit, I used to be a dancer. That was my first career. So I'm not a martial artist at all. I'm too much of a physical coward. But I love good choreography. And when I watch these movies, I see good choreography. So when I hear other people put them down as just chop socky, I get very defensive about the films, and I think no, they may, underneath all the spectacle and all the crazy antics, there's real craft and everything like that. So I do tend to push back a bit at that label, but I did use the word in my book because it's how people tend to refer to them, and it's also not I might get a bit snobby and defensive about the films, but it's not a po-faced genre. It's a fun genre, and it's a genre that has fun at its own expense, I think.
Yeah.
I think it sends itself up. Do you think, Andrew?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, even in, if you go to like Dragon Inn, you kind of look at the dialogue and it is taking the Mickey out of itself. It's not meant to be taken, at face value. I you get surprised when people, it's a bit simplistic. It's like, no. The jokes are meant. The jokes are intended. It is kind of looking at the ridiculousness of this kind of, of the wuxia genre.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I think, I don't know, coming as someone, as a fan, I don't know if Josh and Marlon have felt the same way, but our love for martial arts films is often dismissed by a lot of other people, because the people see them as kind of silly kung fu movies, and they don't look at they haven't thought of or considered even the stuff we talked about today. I mean, Marlon, you've been working in kung fu cinema for a long time now, as with distribution and so forth as well.
Well, to tell the truth, I was kind of glad to see. I kind of, for me as well, because I kind of always hated. I actually hated the American versions. I hated, you know, all that jive talk and some of the dialogue that they used to use in the American films, and it's kind of, I mean, maybe because I used to do it as well, and I was really serious about the whole thing. So, because I even used to hate, you know, any film that had too much flying around. So I wasn't one of the biggest fans of Jet Li. After I saw Jet Li in Shaolin Temple, which I loved, after that, you know, Once Upon a Time in America, that was okay. But there's quite a number of them. A Fist of Legend is good as well. But there's quite a lot of the other films I didn't like, because once I started seeing people start flying around and all that kind of stuff, and then it's like going back to the old days, you know, when they would, you know, throw a spear or something, and they'd jump on the spear and across the screen, and I'd be going, oh bloody hell, and we'd be killing ourselves and laughing. It'd be so funny as well. So, but again, also again, you know, the dubbing was terrible. The dubbing was, you know, like they say, it's like just two. I don't know, to like two. I'd say. You know, mean this in the nicest way and respectful. Two white blokes sitting in you know, some dubbing thing, like they just, like you said, making up the story as it goes along, and you say, what the hell? It's like it doesn't sort of seem to sort of match the film or whatever, and it's like sometimes it'd be like, what? It was just crazy. It was just kind of like really sort of mad. But I don't know. I always took it. I suppose I always wanted to. I would like the serious side of it, and this is why also, you know, Big Trouble in Little China was one of my favorite films as well, because it was the first time that I actually saw real Hong Kong legends, martial artists. You know what I mean? Even though, you know, a lot of them are actors and stuff who've learned martial arts moves, but we saw them in a Western film, and it wasn't people just pretending. It was, you know, Carter Wong, and so wow, that was fantastic. You know, to see that, and again for me, yeah, just. I always wanted to see the real. I like, and then even we used to learn about all the, you know, all the characters. So obviously, you know, Rubber Legs was, as we call Rubber Legs, Silver Fox. Some people may know him as Silver Fox. You know, learning about him and knowing the guys who are real martial artists who weren't just acting; they could actually do it. And obviously, like him. From my understanding, he had actually killed someone, basically.
That was Huang Zhangli, Silver Fox.
Yeah, Silver Fox, or we call him Rubber Legs, basically.
Yeah, you know? Very famous kicker,
Yeah, exactly. He wanted to do all the triple kicks, and his kicks were astonishing, basically. And I was always a kicker. I'm a kick man. So, you know, Tan Tao Ling and John Liu and all them guys were sort of like some of my favourites as well.
Oh, John Liu, the very famous kicker.
Yeah, exactly. Northern Leg, as we call them. Northern. There were two Northern Legs, Tan Tao Ling and John Liu, basically. And we love those guys. But so but I know we kind of enjoyed the jokes as well. It was funny as well. It's entertainment. We wanted to be entertained as well as watch the film. So, but yeah, some of them were actually terrible because again, I mean, I used to have a lot of them on VHS as well. Because I had to sell them to my mates on VHS as well. So I had a big VHS collection. But later on, when I started working on them, and I started working with a PR company called The Associates, and we did. This is when I first started my own company, Kush, and I met this guy Richard Larkham, and we became mates. And I wanted to sort of learn the PR game, so he invited me in, and I started working with them. And we worked on a lot of the re-releases of a lot of films onto DVD, and some of these films, and especially I know we did the Cinema Asia, I think it was, who did they remastered all the Bruce Lee films, and they were redubbed and remastered, and you know, they then kind of got much better dubbing, I found, and a lot of some of the other films as well. Because there were some of the American ones as well, Soul Connection that we did as well, that were sort of like almost some of them were redubbed and remastered and all that kind of stuff, and it was much better than you know, some of the stuff that I was seeing before. But I don't know, I don't know about people taking it as a joke and that sort of stuff. We took it very seriously. We loved them. We loved them. There were no, we didn't have any sort of bad thing. We just stayed away from the ones we didn't like, just like any other genre of film, basically. At the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think we've talked quite a lot now, so I want to open this up to questions from people because we've overrun actually, but hopefully the discussion has been able to keep everyone entertained because everyone's still here anyway. So that's a great thing.